Hey, welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Zone, the at-home edition, the take-home edition. Thanks to Labor Day. He's Justin Kenny. I'm Glenn Marini, and we got a lot to talk about because this past week was, in earnest, the beginning of conference play, not for the SAC, obviously, but for the NE8, for the ACAC. But let's start with the SAC because what people are talking about after this week is the offensive performance that we saw from Carroll and Northside. Your takeaway from that's the big game. That's the one that a lot of people are going to remember from week 3. What did we learn? What don't we know? And what does it mean to bring an abacus to a game and have it burn up on fire after Jeff Becker and Deuce Taylor put together numbers like that?
Well, I think it solidifies the fact that Jeff Becker and Deuce Taylor are the two best quarterbacks in our area. And all due respect to guys like James Arnold and Greg Bolt, but the ways that Deuce Taylor and Jeff Becker affect a game with their arms, with their legs, everything. It was fully on display last Friday, back and forth. And while, it was an exciting game on the scoreboard, it was interesting because neither of those two defenses are that bad. So those two quarterbacks in tearing up those defenses was really impressive. So Carroll gets the win. Now we kind of circle Carroll as that team as potentially could challenge Bishop Dwenger atop the SAC, but I think another team we're kind of already put on the back burner is Homestead, and they'll have a chance to prove themselves coming up this Friday against the Saints.
Yeah, that leads into my next question is how has your hierarchy, your ranking of SAC teams changed? Because we also saw Northrop lose to Wayne. Wayne really pounded them on the ground. So how do you have, maybe like the top 3, 4, 5 teams in the SAC ranked at this point in the year?
I still put Bishop Dwenger number 1 because they were there to begin the season. So I feel like until they get knocked off that top spot, I can't take them out of there. Carroll is number 2. I think Homestead is number 3. Their one loss comes with a shorthanded team, that defense. And, it's kind of thrown together. I think you put Northside at number 4 with losses to Carroll and Bishop Dwenger. And that number 5 spot is kind of up in the air. I mean, do you look at a Snyder right now to be in that spot? I mean, at this point. So, it's kind of after the top 4, I think, is a big jumble. I mean, Concordia with an asterisk without Brandon Davis. He should be back on Friday. That completely changes the complexion of that offense. So it's difficult, I think, after the top 5 to really top 4 to really figure out the hierarchy in the SAC.
See, that I was wondering where you were going to put Concordia because I saw them in person last week. And you're talking about without Brandon Davis and a bunch of guys on both sides of the football, you're talking about a team that has put up 0 points in 2 weeks. 0 against Homestead, 0 against Snyder. Now, Homestead and Snyder are both pretty solid, but it's definitely changed the complexion of that team when you don't have their quarterback. So when you head into this week, you got Carroll at Northrop, Dwenger at Homestead, Lures at Concordia, Snyder at Southside, and Wayne at Northside. It kind of starts in the SAC with Dwenger at Homestead. How do you see that playing out? Because I think we've seen – now that they're healthy, they're obviously a much better team. And you've seen Evan Ormsby get a little more confident, a little more at home at the quarterback position for Chad Zolman and the Spartans.
I think in this game, I'm really looking at that Bishop Dwenger offense against that Homestead defense. I still think that Homestead, despite having the victory bell, that week 1 loss really put a negative taste in a lot of people's mouths with the Spartans. And I think even they are coming out onto the field with something to prove, especially that defense. So really excited to see Bishop Dwenger go up against probably the best defense they have seen all year. Homestead incrementally getting better each and every week offensively. If they can get more balance, I feel, with the passing game to really complement Braden Hardwick, I think that'll definitely help. I think that's a good game, and we'll find out more about where Homestead is after this Friday.
If you're Bishop Dwenger, you've had 3 games, one of them against Northside, the other 2, week 1 against Wayne, and then last week against Southside. It's been a while since, 2 of the 3 games have basically been lopsided. Yeah. So other than the Northside game on the road, you haven't been challenged a whole lot. How much do we know about the Saints at this point? We know they're good, but how much do we know about them at this point in the year?
Not much, to be honest. I mean, other than the Northside game and that they were able to take care of business, in that one. Bishop Dwenger hasn't really been challenged. We feel by week 3 we have a good idea of a lot of these teams. Yet when Bishop Dwenger starts off with South, North, and Wayne, then it's kind of difficult to really get a gauge on where Dwenger is. So we feel like they're the top team in the SAC. They've been playing very good football, but they haven't faced, other than Northside, a real challenge, and that starts this week. But I still feel like I give the edge to Bishop Dwenger, particularly on that defensive side of the football, to really make things difficult for Homestead. They were able to bottle up the run game of Northside in week 2. You feel if they can do that against Braden Hardwick and put the onus on Evan Ormsby to beat them, Bishop Dwenger is going to like their situation and where they're at. So at this point going into Friday, I like Bishop Dwenger. And it goes back to that we still are kind of disrespecting Homestead because of that week 1 loss. They have a chance to really prove some people wrong coming up on Friday.
Let's talk about the Northeast State because last week, other than really Leo Norwell, the games were fairly lopsided, and we knew that going in. This week, a much better schedule in terms of competitive balance. So Huntington North at Columbia City, Leo at New Haven, Norwell at Belmont, Penn at East Noble. Let's start with Leo at New Haven. A lot of people looking forward to this. This will have a big impact on who's going to win the NE8 at the end of the season, most likely. How do you see this one playing out? New Haven went on the road and beat a strong, although smaller school, one with a strong football background in Pioneer. And, Jakar Williams is a load. DeAndre Wright is one of the better linebackers in the area. And because they've had back-to-back 5 and 6 seasons, I don't know if the expectations are as high for New Haven, but they seem to have the talent. They're in the top half of the Northeast State. How do you see Leo New Haven playing out?
I think last week's game for New Haven was the biggest win in the Jimmy Lynn era. It's only been 3 years, and it was a non-conference game. But to be able to go on the road and beat a number 1 team, yeah, it's 2A, but to be able to do that on short notice, adding that game late during the regular season, it was phenomenal. I think that gives New Haven a lot of confidence going into this NE8 opener against Leo. You have to like where New Haven is on both sides of the football. I think this is an elimination game of sorts. Next week we'll see Leo and East Noble. We feel like that will go a long way towards deciding the Northeast State. But with the confidence that New Haven has, they have every confidence in the world that they can go in and compete with the Leo Lions on Friday. And I expect a really good game because we saw Leo not necessarily struggle against Norwell, but we knew the Knights were better, and we were still kind of surprised at that final score at 17-0. So can Leo continue to, rebound from that Mooresville loss and offensively figure some things out against a New Haven defense that is flying to the football and playing with supreme confidence right now?
Yeah, you take a look at the Leo offense. We know Norwell's defense is good. They held Leo to 3 points last year, but Leo got a touchdown return from DJ Allen. They got a field goal from Carson McCauley, and then 1 offensive touchdown. So they only had 1 offensive touchdown last week, which could be problematic against a New Haven team that, has talent at the quarterback. And I think we're underrating the wide receivers at New Haven. I like some of their guys. Woods is a pretty good player. They have multiple options there. So I think they'll be pretty solid in those positions. Huntington North at Columbia City, I think, is a sneaky good game because with Columbia City's schedule, they played a rebuilding Busco. They played Central Noble. They played a Belmont team that we knew was going to be struggling this year and also hadn't played in weeks 1 and 2. So, as always, Columbia City's schedule is a little bit backloaded. What do we know about this game? Because you're talking about a Huntington North team that just played East Noble 28-21 last week.
Yeah, that was the game that we kind of identified last week, Huntington North and East Noble, that after the fact we'd kind of be surprised at the final score, and we were at 28-21 East Noble victory. Huntington North is that forgotten team a little bit in the Northeast State. We look at Belmont, we say, okay, they're completely rebuilding this year. A coach changed late in the preseason, so we kind of know where Belmont is. Everybody else we kind of feel is a contender each and every week in the Northeast State, and then we kind of forget Huntington North. And I think in year 2 of Bob Prescott era, they've shown a lot of improvement. They can run the football as well as anybody in the area, and that can frustrate teams when you're playing that keep-away type football. So when you look at a Columbia City team that, let's be honest, has not been challenged yet this season, It's the first, I think, real game you go into and say, man, Columbia City may have to battle for 4 quarters to get a victory. But then again, Huntington North has to find a way to slow down Greg Bolt, who's just absolutely been torching teams. Last week, throwing for 5 touchdown passes against Belmont. I mean, the kid has been as good as advertised in the Northeast 8. But it's the first real test, I think, for Columbia City. When you look at that schedule, it's once again backloaded with some of the better teams in the Northeast 8. You look at it, and if Columbia City is going to be in the conference race throughout, this is a game they have to win.
Penn East Noble. I know this would be a game that Luke Amstutz wants to win. It would get his team a lot of statewide recognition when you take a look at the history of Penn and the football success that they've had. How important of a game is this? It's a non-conference. It's week 4. It's a game that got added just a couple of weeks ago. But for East Noble, this could be a real, not that they're lacking for confidence, but it could be a real confidence builder and a real kind of show-me game, I guess, across the state for East Noble.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's a prestige type game. It's look at us type game, not just going out and playing Penn, but if they can play Penn competitively. Now, the Kingsmen, traditionally are a 6A power. This year, a little down by Penn standards, but it's still a phenomenal football program with a lot of history. In the big scheme of things, it doesn't mean much of anything. I mean, a lot of people are hyping up this football game, but it's not it's a non-conference game. They're not in the same class. So other than East Noble trying to get a gauge on where they're at, particularly with a game against Leo looming in week 5, this game really doesn't mean anything. And I think inside the program, Luke Amstutz, as you said, wants to win this football game, make a statement. But at the same time, win or lose, it doesn't mean much. I compare it to Leo and Mooresville. And Mooresville beats Leo 34-17, but it gives Leo an opportunity to see where they need to improve. But when you look at an East Noble team that's still going to be missing Rowan Zolman, one of the best two-way players in the area, he's still out for a couple more weeks with a foot injury. You have to expect East Noble to take a little step back. And I think if they can get through Friday intact, not lose any more guys to injury, you have to call it a victory.
Let's talk about the ACAC because we learned a little bit last week, I think, about how dominant South Adams can be. No Hayden Nern for Bluffton, but when you take a look at the South Adams Heritage game, Heritage has obviously played a little bit better, got a little more confidence. They got Kiel Eldridge. He's a big guy. I know Coach Mosier will like to try and shut him down. Jay County at Adams Central, Woodland at Bluffton. How do you see this playing out now that we're into the meat of the ACAC schedule? And we were hoping, I think we were hoping that Bluffton was going to be able to close that gap with South Adams and make this conference race a little more interesting. The Starfires still have Adams Central out there, and we saw how that played out in the playoffs last year. But I think South Adams just really asserted last week how far ahead they are of almost everybody in this conference.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, this conference is once again going to come down to 2 teams. It's going to come to that South Adams, Adams Central showdown later on in the season. And I think it's a significant drop down to Bluffton. And then I think it's a significant drop after that to everyone else. Congratulations to Heritage on getting their first win under Casey Kolkman. But it's a tremendous challenge coming up this Friday after beating Woodland last week. I think it's for South Adams and Adams Central. Just try to stay focused each and every week, because I think South Adams fell into that hole last year where they were just beating people up week after week after week, that they started believing in their own hype, and then it bit them in the regional round. I think that's the key for South Adams, is to be focused each and every week. Same thing with Adams Central. Although they already had a dose of reality in losing to Eastside earlier in the season, I think that can be a confidence builder for them, or motivation going forward. Whereas South Adams, Coach Grant Mosier needs to make sure his guys are focused each and every week, because eventually the games are going to get harder. It just may not happen until the postseason.
NECC, real interesting this week, because we've got a championship-type game for the small division. When you talk about Busco at Eastside, for the last couple of years, it feels like it's come down to these two. And Eastside asserted itself last year as the team to beat. They go in as the team to beat in this one. Busco's kind of gotten its feet under itself after a rough week 1. They've looked really good the last couple of weeks in wins against Lakeland and Garrett. How do you see this one playing out, knowing that, Busco's they got the new quarterback in Riley Burroff. Nick Nondorf is now kind of one of the main weapons. Wyatt Marks is a sophomore running back. That's kind of their trio that did a lot of the damage last week. They're all new in their roles to a certain degree, while Eastside's got like everybody back and they haven't missed a beat in this season.
This game last year was one of the more surprising results we had. At Cherubusco, we felt the Eagles were the class of the small school division in the NECC, and Eastside went in there and just handled them for 4 quarters in a rout. And that's kind of where we were like, whoa, we looked at Eastside as maybe the most complete team in the NECC, big or small school division. I think you're seeing Eastside with a decided edge in this one, but conversely, you're seeing the future of Cherubusco football. You mentioned a lot of names in there, all underclassmen, throwing Hunter Byansky as well. You can see these guys are going to mature over the next year or two and bring Cherubusco back to the pinnacle of NECC football. But right now, that division is owned by Eastside, and I see them rolling on Friday.
What is it that makes Eastside so good? Because it's been – we saw in the Mike Eschbach era, they went from, perennial bottom feeder essentially in the NECC. They took that next step up to competitive. And now with Todd Mason, they've taken that next step up to championship level. How have they been able to do that?
Well, I think, you look across and the guys that get the attention, the Laban Davises and the Wade Millers and those type guys are phenomenal. But I think it starts and ends in the trenches. I think Eastside has become a bigger and more physical program that can go in and compete up front with the Cherubuscos and, the Garretts, when they're up in Angola and the West Noble, Central Noble. I don't think Eastside could do that 3, 4, 5 years ago. They really struggled up front. So they've really been able to grow up front, get a push, get pressure, and win the battle up front. And I think that's helped them, particularly you add those skill position guys. And it's really impressive what Eastside is doing. The experience also helps. We saw it last year. Now into this year, you mentioned it's so much production back. And still, a lot of these guys are juniors, too, for Eastside. So this year, it could be a special season in Eastside, of course, winning their first sectional championship in program history a year ago. I think Eastside has the potential to reach greater heights this year.
So we talked about the small division. The big division has a big game as well. When you're talking about West Noble at Angola, there's a lot of intrigue in this game for a number of reasons. Angola, we've kind of tabbed as the team to beat in that big division. West Noble ran the table last year, off to a little bit of a slower start this season. Angola, meanwhile, hasn't played in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
They had their Michigan game because of the DeKalb situation, and then not having a week 3 game because of the Michigan situation. They're well rested, but I think they'd rather have been playing football.
Right.
So how do you see this one playing out? Because obviously the week 1 performance we've seen from Angola with Tucker Hasselman and those guys, they look really good, although we're not sure how good DeKalb is at this point. So there's just a lot of questions around what we've seen in Angola so far because we haven't seen that much.
Yeah, precisely. We think by week 3, after 3 games, we have a good read on teams, but due to the circumstances with Angola and DeKalb only playing 1 game each, questions still abound about each of those programs. So, Angola, you mentioned Tucker Hasselman, year 2 as a quarterback. We've seen quarterbacks when they're in Angola's system as a varsity quarterback for multiple years, how they grow. We saw that a couple years ago, and we're seeing it with Tucker Hasselman. I feel like Angola is that best team in that big school division, but they've only played 1 game, so we're still kind of a wait-and-see mode. West Noble's still trying to find themselves. We knew they would take a step back. Didn't know it would be this big of a step back after losing what they did from last year's senior group. So I like Angola. I don't know if even this week we get a good idea of how good Angola is. I don't see them being as good as 2018, but I think they're a lot better than they were a year ago.
What are you most looking forward to about week 4? Because we've kind of passed all the checks. We've had a few games canceled because of COVID. Yeah. We've got the non-conference out of the way. We've gotten the first taste of conference in. Everybody's played at least 1 game now that Belmont's out there. So what are you looking forward to here about week 4? Because we're really starting to get into the meat of the season. And for some of the conferences like the Northeast State and the ACAC, there are some meaningful games out there.
I think you look at the SAC and we feel like we have a good idea of the top two teams. And while everybody else is capable of beating each other in any given week, I think we can separate Carroll and Bishop Dwenger from everybody else right now. Of course, Homestead's going to try to prove that wrong this Friday. But I think most of the intrigue now switches to the Northeast 8. You talk Leo and New Haven this Friday. We see East Noble hosting Penn, and we'll see how that goes. You have teams like Norwell that I think opened some eyes last week despite losing. Columbia City as well. Huntington North, the way they played. I really look at it at an NE8, and we talk about the competitive balance in the SAC in the top 9. I think there's in the top 7 of the Northeast 8, anybody can beat anybody. So that's where a lot of the intrigue lies for me, especially over the next 2 weeks with this Friday's schedule in the NE8 and next week, the big one being East Noble and Leo.
All right. Anything else you're looking forward to about this week?
No, man, I'm just glad we're playing week 4. I mean, if you would have asked us a month ago, we were hoping to reach this point, but we're still going strong.
Yeah, to me, and I've said this, I've probably told you this a million times. I thought week 4 was going to be the fulcrum, the decision maker, the hinge, if you will. If you can get through week 4, I think we got a good chance to make a long run in the playoffs. But if once you get to week 4, you've been exposed to a scrimmage, you've been exposed to a couple of teams, and everybody's kind of touched everybody in the little tracer pattern that everyone's doing. So, and you're coming off Labor Day weekend. If we can get through this Friday,
yeah,
I feel like we're in pretty good shape. But that's just me. And it turns out I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to school for quite a long time, and perhaps not my forte.
Yeah.
All right.
If you carry a stethoscope around, I mean, well, it automatically adds credibility.
That's just for my own personal gain. makes me feel like a real man.
Very nice. Any little bit helps.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that will do it for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. We'll be back in studio next Monday. For Justin, I'm Glenn. We'll see you on Wayne.com.